I wasn't looking for another woman. I was looking for a fortress, a place with high walls, a sensible salary, and a workload so demanding it would act as a moat, keeping the messy, unpredictable parts of life at a comfortable distance. After Chloe, my heart felt like a sacked city, all rubble and ghosts. So I retreated. I traded my freelance artist's loft for a sterile apartment, and my chaotic schedule for the rigid 9 to 5 of a junior architect at Sterling and Croft, a firm whose glass and steel monolith of an office building was the physical manifestation of my new life philosophy, impenetrable and cold. The air inside smelled of expensive paper and faint antiseptic lemon. It was the scent of ambition, a perfume I was trying to acquire. On my first day, I sat in the minimalist lobby, clutching a portfolio that felt like a relic from another person's life. My life. The one with paint-stained hands and late-night laughter, and the eventual gutting silence of a shared bed suddenly occupied by one. I pushed the memory down, smoothing the non-existent wrinkles on my gray pencil skirt. This was a new chapter. No color, no chaos, just clean lines and right angles. The woman who emerged from the frosted glass doors behind the reception desk moved with a quiet authority that made the air shift. She wasn't what I expected. I'd pictured a stern, older man, someone with a name like Mr. Abernathy. This woman was maybe 40, with dark lustrous hair pulled back into a severe knot at the nape of her neck. It was a style that should have been harsh, but on her, it only served to emphasize the elegant line of her jaw and the surprising softness of her mouth. She wore a black silk blouse and charcoal trousers that hung with an effortless, expensive grace. She was a sketch rendered in charcoal and shadow, all subtle gradations and devastating precision. Elara Vance? Her voice was low, a smooth contralto that seemed to vibrate in the polished marble floor. It was a voice accustomed to being listened to. I stood, my hand suddenly clammy. Yes, that's me. Lena Sterling? She didn't offer a hand, just a nod. Her eyes, a deep, thoughtful brown, scanned me from head to toe. It wasn't a judgmental look, but it was thorough, an assessment. I felt like a blueprint being checked for structural flaws. I was certain she found several. Welcome to the firm. Your station is on the 34th floor. I'll take you up. The elevator ride was a silent eternity. I stared at the brushed steel doors, hyper aware of her standing beside me. She smelled of something clean and complex, like rain on hot asphalt and a hint of sandalwood. It was nothing like Chloe's cloying gardenia perfume. This scent was grounding, elemental. It was distracting. I hated it. I focused on the glowing numbers above the door, counting the floors, counting the seconds until I could escape the confined space and her unnerving proximity. Her office was a corner suite, sudden emptiness. The fortress I had been seeking had just been handed to me, but I had a sinking feeling that the most dangerous thing in it wasn't the demanding client or the brutal hours. It was the woman in the corner office, the one who smelled like rain and smelled like trouble. The first 2 weeks were a blur of architectural jargon, structural load calculations, and the low, constant hum of anxiety. Lena Sterling was a relentless machine. Her standards weren't just high, they were stratospheric. She would dissect my work with a surgical precision that left me feeling flayed open. She'd point to a line on a blueprint, a line I'd spent hours perfecting, and say, "This is hesitant," or "This solution is adequate but not elegant. Find the elegant solution." There was no praise, only the absence of criticism. An unmarked up drawing returned to my desk was the highest form of approval, a silent testament that I had, for a brief moment, met her expectations. I told myself this was good. This was the whetstone I needed to sharpen the dull edges of my grief. I poured everything I had into the work, fueled by lukewarm coffee and a desperate need to prove myself, both to her and to the ghost of my own past failures. My life shrank to the 34th floor. My apartment was just a place to sleep for a few hours before returning to the glow of my monitors. The city outside the floor-to-ceiling windows became an abstract painting, a collection of distant lights that had nothing to do with me. My world was the smell of blueprints, the click of my keyboard, and the constant, unnerving presence of Lena in the office next to mine. Her door was always open. It was a statement of accessibility, but it felt more like an act of surveillance. I was intensely aware of every sound that came from her office: the soft rustle of paper, the low murmur of her voice on a phone call, the faint, distinctive scrape of her chair as she leaned back to think. Each sound was a reminder of her proximity, a constant hum beneath the surface of my concentration. I tried to build a wall against her in my mind. She was the boss, a walking, talking embodiment of the professional discipline I craved. But my traitorous artist's eye kept noticing details. The way a stray strand of dark hair would escape her severe bun by the end of a long day, clinging to the graceful curve of her neck. The way she'd chew on the end of her pen, a small, unconscious habit that seemed so at odds with her otherwise flawless composure. The way she never raised her voice, yet could quiet a room of boisterous male executives with a single level look. One afternoon, she called me into her office. "Close the door," she said, without looking up from a set of plans spread across her desk. My pulse quickened. A closed door with Lena usually meant I had made a significant error. I braced myself, my hands clasped behind my back, like a schoolgirl awaiting punishment. She finally looked up, her brown eyes intense. "The atrium design," she said, tapping a finger on the blueprint. "It's cold. It meets the client's specifications for square footage and light exposure, but it has no soul." I stared at the drawing. It was a marvel of technical precision, all glass and steel beams, exactly the kind of functional work I told her I wanted to do. "It's efficient," I argued, my voice tight. "It's a void," she countered, her gaze unwavering. "Innovate Corp wants to project an image of creativity, of human-centric design. This looks like a high-end airport terminal. I've seen your old work, Alara, the art center, the library proposal. You know how to create a space that breathes. Why aren't you doing it here?" The question hung in the air, sharp and pointed. It felt deeply personal. She was asking why I had abandoned a part of myself, and she was doing it within the unassailable fortress of her office. I felt a hot flush of anger and shame. "You said you wanted functional," I shot back, my professionalism fraying. "You said there was no room for lyricism." For the first time, I saw something other than cool assessment in her eyes. It was a flash of frustration, maybe even disappointment. I said the project had no room for it, meaning we can't sacrifice function for form. I didn't say the design had to be heartless. There's a difference. An architect's job is to find the harmony between the two. You seem to have forgotten that." She leaned back, her expression unreadable again. "Redo it. Find the soul, Alara. I know it's in you." I walked out of her office feeling shaken, stripped bare. She hadn't just criticized my work, she had seen right through the facade I had so carefully constructed. She saw the artist I was trying to bury, and she was demanding I resurrect her. It was infuriating. It was terrifying. And deep down, in a place I refused to acknowledge, it was exhilarating. That night, for the first time in months, I didn't just work. I sketched. I let my hand move freely, chasing the ghost of a feeling, the echo of a space that could breathe. I was still building my fortress, but Lena Sterling had just shown me, with unnerving accuracy, exactly where the cracks were. And she was demanding I look at them. The project became a living entity, a ravenous beast that consumed our days and nights. Forced proximity wasn't just a circumstance. It was the very air we breathed. My desk, strategically placed just outside her open door, meant there was no escaping her. I learned the rhythm of her days through sound and scent. The sharp, citrusy smell of the cleaner who came at dawn was followed by the rich, dark aroma of the coffee she brewed herself, a ritual she performed with quiet focus in the small office kitchenette. I learned that she hummed, a low, barely audible sound, when she was deep in thought, a melodic counterpoint to the frantic clicking of my own mouse. I kept my head down, my screen a shield, but my senses were in revolt, cataloging her existence against my will. I saw her reflection in the glass wall of my cubicle as she paced her office on a call, her silhouette a stark, elegant shape against the city lights. I felt the subtle shift in air pressure when she walked past my desk. I started to be able to identify her footsteps in the hallway, a steady, unhurried cadence that was entirely different from everyone else's frantic scuttling. My observations became more granular, more intimate. I noticed she had a small faded scar just above her left eyebrow, a tiny silver crescent that was only visible when the afternoon sun hit her face at a certain angle. I wondered how she got it. I noticed the way her fingers, long and graceful, would trace the lines of a blueprint, a touch that was both analytical and strangely gentle. She wore a simple, unadorned silver ring on her right hand, a band that looked worn, smooth with age. I found myself staring at it, imagining its coolness against my skin. These thoughts were intrusive, unwelcome. They were a distraction from the sterile perfection I was trying to achieve in my work and in my life. I'd catch myself sketching her face in the margins of a notepad, the sharp angle of her nose, the curve of her lips, and would viciously scribble over it, my heart pounding with a mixture of shame and something else, something I refused to name. It felt like a betrayal of my own hard-won numbness. Women were a landscape of pain I had vowed never to explore again, especially not a woman who held my entire professional future in the palm of her capable, long-fingered hand. We fell into a routine, born of shared exhaustion. Around 8 o'clock, one of us would wordlessly get up and order food. We'd eat at the massive conference table, the half-finished model of the Innovate Corp headquarters sitting between us like a silent, demanding child. The conversation, at first, was strictly work. We'd debate the merits of a particular building material or the flow of foot traffic through the lobby. But slowly, the walls began to erode. One night, over greasy cartons of Thai food, she looked at the model and said, "My father was a carpenter. He would have hated this." I was so surprised by the personal revelation, however small, that I almost dropped my fork. "Why? Too much steel," she said, a faint wry smile touching her lips. "Not enough honesty. He believed you should always be able to see how a thing is held together. He loved exposed joints, wooden pegs. He said it was about integrity." She looked at me. "He would have liked your art center design." The compliment, so unexpected and personal, landed directly in the center of my chest. It was different from her professional critiques. This felt like a glimpse behind the curtain, a view of the woman, not the boss. "He sounds solid," I said, for lack of a better word. "He was," she said, her voice soft. "He built the house I grew up in. I can still smell the sawdust." The moment of nostalgia passed, and she blinked, her professional mask sliding back into place. "But steel is what the client wants." The conversation was over, but the shift remained. She had offered a piece of herself, a small polished stone from her past, and handed it to me. I didn't know what to do with it. I wanted to ask more, to know about the girl who grew up in a house that smelled of sawdust, the girl who became this formidable woman. But I didn't dare. The boundary between us was clear. We should keep this professional. And yet, she was the one who kept blurring the lines, drawing me closer with these small, calculated glimpses of her humanity. I was a cartographer of her moods, learning the subtle geography of her smiles, the rare, low rumble of her laughter, the tectonic shifts in her tone. I was mapping a territory I had sworn I would never enter, and I was beginning to realize, with a growing sense of panic, that I was already hopelessly lost. The breakthrough on the atrium design came late on a Tuesday, fueled by the dregs of our third pot of coffee. We'd been staring at the same set of blueprints for 3 hours, the silence in her office thick with frustration. I had presented 6 different iterations, each more technically sound and emotionally vacant than the last. Lena had rejected them all with a quiet, firm, no, still not it. I was exhausted, my brain feeling like a wrung-out sponge. My carefully constructed professional shell was cracking under the pressure, and a raw, familiar frustration began to seep through. It was the same feeling I used to get in my old studio when a painting refused to come to life, when the colors on the canvas felt like lies. "I don't know what you want," I finally burst out, shoving a hand through my messy hair. The words were unprofessional, insubordinate even, but I was past caring. You say you want soul, but everything with soul feels messy, vulnerable. This whole building is about strength, about being impenetrable. How do you put a soul inside a fortress? The moment I said it, I froze. The question wasn't just about the atrium. It was about me. It was a raw confession, laid bare on her immaculate oak desk. I expected a reprimand, a cold reminder of my place. Instead, Lena leaned back in her chair, her expression softening in a way I'd never seen before. She looked not at the blueprints, but at me. "You don't put it inside," she said, her voice gentle. "You let the light in. A fortress doesn't have to be a prison. It can be a sanctuary. The strength comes from the design, from the structure. The soul comes from how it interacts with the world outside, how the light falls at noon, how it feels to stand inside it during a rainstorm. It's not about being messy. It's about being honest." She stood up and walked over to the window, gazing down at the river of headlights flowing through the city's arteries. "When I was an intern," she began, her voice distant, "I worked on a project for a very famous, very arrogant architect. My first big project. I designed a cantilevered balcony that was, I thought, the most beautiful thing I had ever conceived. It was delicate, poetic." She gave a short, self-deprecating laugh. "And it was a structural nightmare. My boss tore it to shreds in front of the entire team. He said I had a poet's heart and a fool's grasp of physics. He told me to go back to sketching pretty pictures." She turned to face me, her silhouette framed by the glittering skyline. "I almost quit that day. I went home and I packed a bag. I was going to move back home, work in my father's wood shop. But then I realized he was right. It was a structural nightmare. My idea was beautiful, but my execution was weak. The feeling was honest, but the structure was a lie." She walked back to the desk and picked up a pencil. "So I went back the next day. I stayed up for 3 nights straight, with engineering manuals and coffee, and I redesigned it. I kept the soul of it, the feeling of floating, but I made it strong. I found a way to marry the poetry to the physics." She looked at me, her eyes dark and serious in the lamplight. "He hated that I'd fixed it, but he used the design. That's when I learned that vulnerability isn't a weakness, Alara. Hiding from it is. Your first idea, the one you're afraid to show me, is probably the right one. You just haven't figured out how to make it strong yet." The air in the room was still. She had done it again, taken a piece of her past, a moment of profound failure and subsequent triumph, and laid it in my hands. It was an offering of trust, a bridge built across the chasm of our professional roles. She wasn't just my boss anymore. She was a woman who had faced down her own demons of self-doubt and won. She was a woman who understood the terror and the necessity of being vulnerable. A wave of emotion washed over me, so potent it made my eyes sting. It was gratitude, it was respect, and it was a deep, aching recognition. In her story, I heard the echoes of my own, the fear of not being good enough, The shame of being told I was too much, too emotional. Chloe's parting words had been, "You just feel everything so intensely. It's exhausting." Without thinking, I reached for a blank sheet of paper and a charcoal pencil. "The light," I whispered, mostly to myself. "It's about the light." My hands started to move, the muscle memory of 1,000 late-night sketches taking over. I drew a vast open space, but instead of a solid glass roof, I designed a series of overlapping wing-like structures, angled to catch the morning sun and diffuse it into a soft, cathedral-like glow. I incorporated natural materials, wood, stone, to anchor the space, to give it the honesty her father would have appreciated. It was lyrical, it was bold, and as I sketched the support system, the physics of it, I knew it was strong. I worked for an hour in complete silence, aware of Lena watching me, not with the critical eye of a supervisor, but with a quiet, patient stillness. When I finally finished, my hand smudged with charcoal, I pushed the drawing across the desk. She studied it for a long time, her finger tracing the lines I had drawn. The silence stretched, and my anxiety returned in a rush. Maybe I had misread everything. Maybe it was just as foolish as my other attempts. Finally, she looked up. Her face was illuminated by the single desk lamp, her features soft in the warm glow. A slow, genuine smile spread across her lips, transforming her entire face. It was like watching the sun rise. "There it is," she said, her voice a low murmur. "There's the soul." In that moment, sitting in the quiet intimacy of her office, with the city sleeping below us, the fortress I had built around my heart didn't just have cracks in it. A whole wall had just come tumbling down. The shared confession about the atrium design created a new current between us. The professional hierarchy remained, a formal structure we adhered to during meetings and official work hours. But in the quiet hours after the rest of the office had emptied out, a different dynamic bloomed. The trust she had placed in me by sharing her story of failure became a foundation for a tentative, fragile reciprocity. One evening, as we were packing up, my phone buzzed with a call from my mother. I usually let her calls go to voicemail, especially at work, not wanting to mix my two worlds. But something about the newfound ease in the air with Lena made me answer. It was a mistake. My mother launched into her usual litany of worries. Was I eating enough? Was I sleeping? Was I making any friends? The final question was the one that always landed like a stone. "You just seem so isolated out there, sweetie. After everything with Chloe, I just worry you've closed yourself off." I ended the call quickly, my face burning. I turned to find Lena watching me, her expression unreadable. I felt exposed. The carefully curated image of the detached professional shattered. "Sorry about that," I mumbled, shoving my phone into my bag with more force than necessary. "My mother. She worries." "All mothers worry," Lena said simply. She leaned against the doorframe of her office, her arms crossed. "Is that who you were before? The person she's worried you've lost?" The question was direct, yet gentle. It wasn't an accusation. It was an invitation. I hesitated, the habit of deflection strong, but her patient gaze held me, creating a space for honesty. "I don't know who I was before," I admitted, the words tasting strange and true. "I was an artist. I was in a long-term relationship I thought I knew, but it all fell apart. Coming here, taking this job, it was supposed to be a reset, a way to be someone different, someone more structured." "And is it working?" she asked, her voice low. I let out a short, humorless laugh. "I have an impeccable filing system, and my apartment looks like a furniture showroom, so yes, on the surface." I looked up at her, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "But I haven't painted in 6 months." And the quiet in my apartment is so loud sometimes, it feels like it's screaming. It was the most I had said about my personal life to anyone in months. The confession hung in the air between us, vulnerable and real. I expected her to retreat, to put the professional wall back up. Instead, she nodded slowly. "I understand the screaming quiet," she said. Her voice was imbued with a deep, resonant empathy that vibrated through me. After my father died, I sold the house he built. I bought a minimalist condo downtown. I thought if I stripped away all the memories, the quiet would be peaceful. For a year, it was just deafening. My breath caught. We were standing on opposite sides of a threshold, but in that moment, we were in the same room, a space built of shared loss and the silence that follows it. She was talking about her father, the carpenter, the man who valued honesty and structure. "What changed?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I bought a ridiculous oversized antique drafting table," she said, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "It barely fit in my living room. It's covered in nicks and coffee rings. And I started drawing again. Not for work, just for me. It didn't make the quiet go away, but it gave it a different shape." She was giving me a piece of her story, a blueprint for survival. Find the thing that gives the quiet a different shape. She was telling me, in her own indirect way, that I didn't have to bury the artist. I just had to build a new room for her. The reciprocity felt profound, a careful exchange of vulnerabilities that deepened the lines of connection between us. The power imbalance of our professional lives seemed to dissolve in these moments, replaced by the simple, egalitarian truth of two women sharing their stories, trying to find their way out of their respective silences. The trust between us was no longer just about blueprints and deadlines. It was becoming something more substantial, something that felt both deeply comforting and incredibly dangerous. The turn happened on a Thursday. It was a small thing, a moment so fleeting it could have been imagined, but it shifted the tectonic plates of our relationship, and nothing was the same afterward. We were in the model room, a small, windowless space filled with miniature cities and dissected buildings. The air was thick with the chemical tang of glue and cut foam board. Lena was demonstrating a new technique for creating textured facades on the Innovate Corp model, and I was leaning in close to watch, our shoulders almost touching. Her hands, those long, capable hands I'd spent so much time observing from a distance, moved with a hypnotic grace. She was using a tiny spatula to apply a thin layer of plaster, her focus absolute. I was so mesmerized by the dexterity of her fingers, by the way her brow furrowed in concentration, that I didn't realize how close I was standing until she turned to grab a different tool. Her arm brushed against mine. It wasn't a bump or a jostle. It was a slow, deliberate slide of the fine-gauge cashmere of her sweater against the bare skin of my forearm. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot up my arm and detonated in the center of my chest. It was like grabbing a live wire. Every nerve ending in my body lit up, screaming with a sudden, overwhelming awareness. I flinched back as if burned. Lena froze, her hand hovering over the tool tray. She slowly turned her head to look at me. The few feet between us suddenly felt charged, the air thick and humming. Her eyes, which I had always seen as analytical and cool, were now dark, wide, and filled with a startling vulnerability. I saw it then. The same shock, the same bolt of lightning reflected in her gaze. Neither of us spoke. The silence in the small room was absolute, broken only by the frantic pounding of my own heart. I could see the pulse beating in the delicate skin of her throat. My gaze dropped to her mouth, to the soft curve of her bottom lip, and a wild, terrifying thought blazed through my mind. I want to kiss her. The thought was so powerful, so undeniable, that I felt a dizzying wave of vertigo. This wasn't just admiration, this wasn't professional respect. This wasn't even the reluctant aesthetic appreciation I'd been trying to convince myself it was. This was raw, unvarnished desire. It was a yearning so deep, it felt like it was carved into my bones. And the most terrifying part was the look on her face, the dawning awareness in her eyes that told me, unequivocally, that she felt it too. The moment stretched, taut and fragile. It could have snapped in a dozen different ways. She could have laughed it off, made a joke, turned back to the model, and pretended it never happened. She could have given me a sharp, cold look that put me firmly back in my place. She did none of those things. She held my gaze for another heartbeat, her expression a maelstrom of emotions I couldn't begin to decipher. Then she slowly, deliberately, retracted her hand. She took a small step back, creating a space between us that felt both like a necessary breath of air and an unbearable chasm. She cleared her throat, and the sound was unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "I think," she said, her voice a little rough, "that's enough for today." She turned and walked out of the model room without another word, leaving me standing there with the ghost of her touch still burning on my skin. I stared at the spot where she had been, my mind reeling. The professional boundary, the one she had so clearly articulated on my first day, had just been vaporized. We had both felt it. We had both acknowledged it in that silent, charged moment. Everything had changed. The fortress I had so carefully constructed around myself was not only breached, it was irrelevant. The real danger wasn't outside the walls anymore. It was standing right next to me, smelling of sandalwood and rain, and looking at me like she could see every secret I'd ever kept. The slow burn had just ignited, and I was terrified of the fire to come. The days following the incident in the model room were a study in exquisite torture. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, with the memory of that electric touch. Every interaction, no matter how mundane, was charged with a new, unbearable significance. When she handed me a document, I was hyper-aware of the moment our fingers might brush. When she stood behind me to look at my screen, I could feel the warmth radiating from her body, and I had to fight the urge to lean back, to close the infinitesimal distance between us. My internal monologue became a relentless, obsessive loop. Did she mean to touch me? Did she feel it too? Was that pity in her eyes? Or was it desire? I replayed the moment 1,000 times, dissecting every micro-expression, every nuance in her posture. I was a detective investigating a crime that had only happened in the space of a single heartbeat, and the only suspect was my own fracturing heart. Lena, for her part, retreated into an even more impenetrable fortress of professionalism. She was polite, efficient, and distant. Her office door, which had been perpetually open, was now often closed. The late-night work sessions, once a space for budding intimacy, became tense and silent. She was rebuilding the wall between us, brick by careful brick, and every brick she laid felt like a personal rejection. It was a clear message. The line was crossed. It will not be crossed again. I tried to follow her lead. I tried to be the focused, detached employee she wanted me to be. But it was like trying to ignore a symphony playing at full volume in a library. My body betrayed me at every turn. My pulse would race when she entered a room. My hands would tremble when I had to present my work to her. My focus, once razor-sharp, was now hopelessly diffused. My thoughts constantly drifting to the silver scar above her eyebrow, the sound of her low laugh, the memory of her cashmere sweater against my skin. My work began to suffer. A detail I would have caught a month ago slipped past me. A calculation was off by a fraction. They were small mistakes, but they were mistakes nonetheless, and they did not go unnoticed. Lena would point them out in a tone that was flat and devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to the engaged, challenging way she had critiqued my work before. Her disappointment was a cold weight in my stomach. I was failing at the one thing I was supposed to be good at, the very thing that was meant to be my salvation. One afternoon, my phone rang. It was my sister Megan. I stepped into the hallway to take the call, grateful for the escape. "Hey, you!" she said, her voice tinny through the phone. "Just checking in. You've been a ghost." "Sorry, Meg, this project is just all-consuming." "Yeah, I'll bet." There was a knowing, cautious tone in her voice that set my teeth on edge. "Listen, Mom told me you've been working really closely with your boss. A woman, right?" My stomach clenched. "Yes, her name is Lena." "What about it?" "Nothing, nothing. It's just... Ilara, please be careful." "Careful of what? Of doing my job?" I snapped, my defensiveness a raw, exposed nerve. "No, careful of you," she said, her voice softening. "I was there, remember? After Chloe. I was the one who scraped you off the floor. You fall hard and you fall fast, and you have a tendency to pick complicated women." "Lena isn't complicated. She's my boss." I lied, the words tasting like acid. "And that's not complicated?" Megan sighed, a sound heavy with sisterly exasperation. "Look, all I'm saying is, you built this whole new life to protect yourself. Don't go setting fire to it for a workplace crush, especially not, you know, another woman. It never ends well for you." Her words were a cocktail of genuine concern and subtle, ingrained judgment. It never ends well for you. As if my attraction to women was a character flaw, a predisposition to disaster. The sting of it, combined with the stress of the situation with Lena, was too much. "I have to go," I said abruptly, my voice choked. "I have a deadline." I hung up before she could reply, leaning my forehead against the cool glass of the hallway window. The city sprawled below me, indifferent. Megan's words echoed in my head, reinforcing all my deepest fears. Complicated women. It never ends well. Chloe had been complicated. She had been a whirlwind of passion and drama, and loving her had left me in ruins. Was I doing it again? Was I drawn to the fire, destined to get burned? I looked back towards Lena's office. Her door was closed. She was in there, a puzzle I couldn't solve, a desire I couldn't extinguish. Megan was right about one thing. I was setting fire to the life I had so carefully constructed. The smoke was starting to fill my lungs, and I didn't know whether to run from the flames or let them consume me completely. The tension was becoming unbearable, a string pulled so taut it had to either snap or be played. The storm that broke the city also broke us. It rolled in on a Friday evening, a churning mass of bruised purple clouds that swallowed the skyline. We were supposed to be celebrating. The final presentation for the Innovate Corp headquarters was in the morning, and after 3 months of relentless work, the models were finished, the blueprints were printed, and every last detail had been checked and rechecked. The rest of the team had left early, a palpable sense of relief rippling through the office as they escaped into the city for a well-deserved weekend. Only Lena and I remained. She was doing one last review of the presentation deck in her office, and I was tidying up the model room, my movements slow and deliberate, putting off the moment I would have to walk past her closed door and go home to my screamingly quiet apartment. The first clap of thunder rattled the floor-to-ceiling windows, a deep, guttural growl that made me jump. The lights flickered once, twice, then held steady. A few minutes later, Lena appeared in the doorway of the model room. "The weather service is calling this a severe one," she said, her voice calm, but her eyes held a flicker of concern. "They're advising people to stay off the roads. The trains are probably already shutting down." "I took a cab," I said, my voice small. "They'll be impossible to get now," she stated, a matter-of-factness that offered no comfort. She looked out the window at the sheets of rain lashing against the glass. The wind howled, a mournful, wild sound. "It looks like we're stuck here for a while." The reality of the situation settled over me. Trapped, on the 34th floor, with her. The air, already thick with unspoken tension, suddenly felt heavy, charged with the electricity of the storm outside. "There's a sofa in my office," she said, her tone still resolutely practical. "And there are emergency cots in the supply closet. We'll be fine." We retreated to her office, the space that had become the epicenter of my anxiety and longing. The storm raged outside, a dramatic, violent backdrop to the quiet, simmering storm between us. We didn't speak for a long time. She sat at her desk, pretending to read something on her laptop, and I sat in the chair opposite her, pretending to read a magazine I'd grabbed from the lobby. The silence was a physical presence, a third person in the room. Then, with a final violent groan, the building's emergency generators failed. The lights went out. The hum of the ventilation system died. We were plunged into an absolute disorienting darkness. I gasped, a small, involuntary sound. "It's okay." Lena's voice came out of the blackness, closer than I expected. There was a rustle of movement, then the sharp click of a lighter. A small, wavering flame bloomed, and she lit the thick decorative candle that sat on the corner of her desk. The emergency lights in the hallway flickered on, casting long, eerie shadows into the room. But the candle was the main source of light, a small pool of warm, dancing gold in the overwhelming dark. Her face was transformed in the candlelight. The severe lines were softened, her eyes deep, dark pools of shadow. The professional mask was gone, stripped away by the darkness and the storm. All that was left was the woman. "Well," she said, a wry, tired smile touching her lips. "So much for the final review." The shared absurdity of the situation, the release of months of pent-up tension, made a laugh bubble up out of me. It was a real laugh, not the short, humorless sound I'd grown accustomed to. Lena smiled back, a genuine, unguarded smile that made my heart ache. "I think there's some whiskey in the bottom drawer of the credenza," she said. "A gift from a client. Seems like as good a time as any." She poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into 2 coffee mugs, the only vessels we could find. She handed one to me, our fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. The jolt was still there, but this time neither of us pulled away. We stood by the window, sipping the whiskey, watching the lightning fork across the sky, illuminating the rain-slicked city in brief, stunning flashes. The storm was a wild, beautiful, terrifying thing. "It's beautiful," I whispered, captivated by the raw power of it. "I've always loved storms," she said, her voice a low murmur beside me. "They're honest. No pretense." We were quiet for a moment, the only sounds the howling wind and the crackle of the candle. "Alara," she said, her voice so soft I almost didn't hear it over the storm. She turned to face me. "I need to apologize." I looked at her, confused. "For what?" "For the last few weeks," she said, her gaze steady and intense. "For being distant, for closing my door. I was a coward." My heart hammered against my ribs. "I don't understand." "Yes, you do," she countered gently. "In the model room, when I touched you, I felt it, and it terrified me." She took a breath, the confession seeming to cost her something. "You have to understand, my entire career, my entire life has been about control, about structure. And you walked in here with your lyrical designs and your sad, honest eyes, and you dismantled everything. And I let you." She took a step closer, the space between us shrinking until I could feel the heat from her body, could smell the sandalwood and the whiskey on her breath. "I told you to keep it professional," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But that was for me, not for you. It was a rule I made because the first time I saw you, standing in the lobby looking so lost and so defiant, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very, very long time. Something that had no place within these walls." Tears pricked my eyes. Every doubt, every fear, every tortured question of the last few weeks was dissolving in the face of her raw, stunning honesty. I thought it was just me, I choked out, the words a tangled mess of relief and disbelief. No, she said, her voice a ragged whisper. It was never just you. She raised a hand, her fingers trembling slightly, and gently brushed a stray strand of hair from my cheek. Her touch was hesitant, questioning. It wasn't the accidental brush of cashmere. It was a deliberate, tender caress that sent a tremor through my entire body. I leaned into her touch, my eyes fluttering closed, a silent surrender. Lena, I breathed her name, and it felt like both a prayer and a plea. In the flickering candlelight, with the storm raging around us like the physical manifestation of the chaos in my heart, she closed the final inch between us. Her lips met mine, and the world fell away. It wasn't a hesitant kiss. It was a kiss of homecoming, of recognition, of months of unspoken yearning finally given a voice. It was desperate and tender, fierce and searching. It tasted of whiskey and rain and the soul-deep relief of finally being seen. She wrapped her arms around me, pulling me flush against her, and I tangled my fingers in the hair at the nape of her neck, the severe knot coming undone beneath my touch. The dam had broken, the fortress had fallen, and in the ruins under the wild dark sky we were finally, terrifyingly free. The world came back into focus slowly, piece by piece. The howl of the wind, the flickering candlelight, the solid, warm reality of Lena's body pressed against mine. We broke the kiss, resting our foreheads together, both of us breathing heavily, the air thick with the aftershock of her confession and the raw power of what had just passed between us. So, I said, my voice shaky, a weak attempt to tether myself to reality. The sofa or the emergency cots? A low, rich laugh rumbled in her chest, a sound I felt more than heard. The sofa, she said, her voice husky. It's marginally more dignified. There was an awkwardness in the morning light. The storm had passed, leaving behind a city washed clean, glittering under a pale, watery sun. The power was still out. The silence in the office was absolute. We had slept tangled together on the narrow sofa in her office, a borrowed suit jacket of hers as a blanket. Waking up with my head on her shoulder, the scent of her skin, sandalwood and woman, filling my senses, had felt more real than anything I had experienced in years. Now, in the unforgiving light of day, the realities of our situation came rushing back in. She was Lena Sterling, my boss. I was Alara Vance, her subordinate. Last night was a dreamlike aberration in a candlelit world. This was the morning after. I sat up, pulling the jacket tighter around myself, suddenly feeling exposed. Lena, I started, my voice hoarse. About last night. She turned to me, her hair down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked younger, softer, but her eyes were clear and serious. Alara, I don't regret a single second of it, she said, her directness cutting through my anxiety. But we have to be smart about this. I can't be your boss. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Of course, it was over before it began. It was a storm-induced fantasy. Seeing the look on my face, she reached out and took my hand, her fingers warm and firm around mine. No, listen to me, she said urgently. I'm not saying I don't want this. I'm saying I want this more than I want the convenience of our current professional structure. It's not fair to you. The power imbalance is real, and I won't have you feeling like you're in a compromised position. I won't have anyone ever thinking you got ahead for any reason other than your own brilliance. She was protecting me. She was thinking about the consequences, about my career, about how this would look to the outside world. The sheer ethical decency of it was so profoundly attractive, so fundamentally different from Chloe's self-serving chaos, that it made my throat tighten. "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice small. "Today we nail this presentation," she said, her tone shifting, becoming the decisive leader I knew. "We show them the incredible work you did. And on Monday morning, I'm going to talk to Marcus Croft. I'm going to tell him that your work on this project has been so exemplary that you deserve to lead your own team. I'll recommend you be transferred to head the new Municipal Projects Division. You won't report to me. We'll be colleagues, equals." It was a plan, a concrete, actionable plan. She wasn't just offering vague promises. She was mapping out a solution, a way for us to have a chance. She was building a new structure, an honest one, where we could exist together. Is that what you want?" I asked, needing to hear it one more time. She brought my hand to her lips and pressed a soft kiss to my knuckles. Her eyes, full of a warmth that I now knew was not just for show, met mine. "What I want," she said, her voice a low, intimate murmur, "is to take you to dinner on Monday night, as my colleague, and to see where it goes." The final weeks of the year were a whirlwind. The Innovate Corp presentation was a resounding success. Lena was true to her word. The meeting with Marcus Croft happened on Monday. By Wednesday, my transfer was approved. I was moving to the 35th floor, to a small office of my own, to lead a team working on a new library and a public park. The work was lyrical. It had soul. It was my work. Our relationship unfolded slowly, cautiously, in the spaces outside the office. Our first date was at a small, quiet Italian restaurant, where she told me about the antique drafting table in her condo, and I told her about the half-finished canvas that was sitting in my closet. There were more dates. There were late-night talks that lasted until the sun came up. There were weekends spent in her minimalist condo, which slowly became less minimal as a few of my books, a spare toothbrush, and a brightly colored throw blanket found their way into the space. She encouraged me to paint again. One Saturday, she set up an easel for me by the large window in her living room. I stared at the blank canvas for an hour, paralyzed by the old fear. She didn't push. She just sat on the sofa, reading, occasionally looking up to give me a small, encouraging smile. And eventually, I picked up a brush. The first stroke was terrifying. The second was liberating. I was still learning the shape of her, the quiet corners of her heart. I learned that her severity was a shield forged in a male-dominated industry that mistook kindness for weakness. I learned that her love for structure and order was a way of honoring her father, the carpenter who taught her that good things are built to last. One night, we were lying in her bed, the city lights a soft glow through the window. It was quiet, but it wasn't the screaming quiet of my empty apartment. It was a peaceful, shared silence. I was so afraid, I confessed into the darkness, my head resting on her shoulder. After my last relationship, I thought being vulnerable was the same as being weak. I thought I had to be a fortress. She was quiet for a moment, her fingers gently tracing patterns on my back. "A fortress isn't weak, Alara," she said softly. "It just needs to have windows and a door you're not afraid to open for the right person." I thought about the woman I was when I first walked into Sterling and Croft, a ghost haunted by my past. And I thought about the woman I was now, lying in the arms of this incredible, strong, and gentle woman who had not torn down my walls, but had patiently taught me how to build a door. She hadn't saved me. She had simply created a space safe enough for me to save myself. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was something better. It was real. It was a structure we were building together, with integrity, honesty, and a whole lot of soul. Have you ever had to choose between the safety of the walls you've built and the terrifying, beautiful possibility of letting someone in? If you've ever felt that pull, let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like this story and subscribe for more.